It's a lifelong career. You know, there are so many facets within the hospitality that you can do, and that I really want to be that person that's pushing, you know, education and learning and training in a regional area, whether that be through wine, but also to just making people really happy. People, if you come here, it's hard to not be happy, you know, and we want to just build environments where people come and just have the best time.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. We've spoken to many professionals who have talked of the incredible experience of heading to Europe, and particularly the UK, to further their careers in hospitality. But there are some that have gone the other way, left the UK and embarked on an amazing career down under. What is the lure for a career and life in Australia? Ben Brown is the Group General Manager of Allure. Ben, how are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Good. You've been involved with some pretty incredible venues in Australia. How much of your hospitality career has been in Australia?
Well, I've been here now almost 13 years, and I've spent those prime years, 20 to I'm 35 this year, working in Sydney pretty much. And I've literally just before Christmas moved up here to Foster to start a new little part of my life.
Well, you're on a new adventure and started a new role. But before we dive into that, take us back to the UK. What was food like for you and your family as a kid?
Yeah, food was like pretty much everything. My dad worked for Bird's Eye Peas for 40 years. So he had his own farm, and then in the summer for 6 weeks, he used to work about 10 weeks, 12-hour days on the pea harvest. So it was like going to see him sitting in a field of peas, potting peas, eating them. That's my original memory of any type of food, which is now probably why it's my favourite vegetable, you know. And my mum just doesn't stop cooking. Whether it's for the family, for friends, and now she does it as a kind of I'm meant to be retired, but I'm not retired kind of vibe.
Are there any sort of feasts that you can tell us about from when you were young with your family that really stand out?
I mean, Christmas is the obvious one, where I've got two sisters. They've got 5 kiddies. At the time, all my grandparents were alive, so Christmas Day would have been 20 people, and they would have all been at the farm or my parents' house, and everything was there. Big entree, lots of salmon, and then the main course would have been all the vegetables mildly overcooked. Hopefully my mum won't listen, but mildly overcooked, and then just as much meat as will feed 20 people for 4 days. And you'd have ham sandwiches forever. But that kind of slowly got me into cooking, because I wanted to help year on year. And then when I got old enough, she didn't like it, but I did cook Christmas lunch once. So
Wow. Well, tell us about that you cooked Christmas lunch once. What did you cook?
I mean, it was pretty classic. It was actually a year that I came back. I moved to Australia to 2009, and then that was in February. And in Christmas 2009, I went home as a surprise, and I surprised them on the 23rd. Only my sister's husband knew, and I flew back to England. I got the express bus back to Norfolk, which was another 4-hour drive, and then he picked me up and dropped me outside the house, and I just rocked up, and it was the most beautiful thing. It was only been 6 months, but it was so beautiful, and I was like, I'm going to cook because I'm back. And it was I remember Mum, after I got back to Australia, she was like, did you buy this from the butcher? And I was like, yeah. She's like, we don't normally buy that sort of meat from the butchers. It was £200 or something for this piece of beef. It was with beef and turkey and Yorkshire puddings and sprouts and parsnips, carrots, most of it from the garden, a real English Christmas lunch.
Take us back to the moment when you started to think about hospitality as a career. What were the first stepping stones for you?
Again, really actually involves my mum. There at that time, the best restaurant in Norfolk was a place called Morstan Hall Hotel. It had 1 Michelin. It was like a little country house hotel, 5 rooms, and they did a dinner service, which was a set time. So everybody went at 7 o'clock for drinks. Everyone sat down at 7:30, and it kind of worked like a wedding vibe, that thing. Anyway, my mum used to babysit the owner's kids, and they were looking for a kitchen hand. And my mum was like, well, Ben's not doing anything. More than anything, he's annoying me. He can come down and do it. So I think I was like 13 or 14, and I just went and did the dishes for like a few nights. I would say probably after about half an hour, I was like, this is the best. I want to do this forever. And that's where I met my like first mentor, Isaac, who was the manager of the floor at that point, who just oozed charisma and just happiness and just smiled all the time. And I was like, oh, I love this kind of vibe. And that was like the first, like, okay, this feels good.
What did you take from your time working under Isaac and in that establishment?
Well, I wanted to be a chef. Like, I loved cooking. I loved the idea of like vegetables and meat. Even though I was young, quite naive, I just loved the idea of all this stuff. And Norfolk produce is great. You know, in the summer you get the most beautiful strawberries. And so for a while I was cooking. And then one day it just dawned on me that I was like, I don't really see much sunlight. This kitchen was pretty dark. So I was like, I kind of like talking to people. I'm just in this little corner. And I just said to them, hey, I'd love to maybe have a go on the floor. And they were like, yeah, okay, cool. And then like the first day I was like, the kitchen was great. This is the best. It was such a beautiful little venue. And I don't know, I just felt right. It just felt like this is what I should be doing. And then I got pretty good friends with Isaac, and he just showed me everything. You know, I went from, what was that, probably like 16, doing, you know, weekends, school holidays, and then 17 was college. So I went to a college called Norwich City College. That from my small little school, only 2 people went to that college. Out of like 100 people, 2 people went to that college. You either went there for like hairdressing or like cooking. And so I did the trip. I did that for 2 years. You know, that was like a 6:30 bus for 2 hours to get to Norwich for the first lesson to be at like 9:30. And then you get back home at 8 o'clock on the bus, like, because I wanted it so bad. And so that I went there when I was 17. So the 2 years college, 18, 19. And then when I finished college, I went full-time at Mawston. And as like I think they called them a general assistant, where you basically just did everything. You know, you portioned the grapefruits for breakfast, you turned the beds over when everyone was having gin and tonics at 7 o'clock, you ran the food, everything. And then he left when I was like early 20s. I'd been there for, you know, already 5 years, bits and bobs. And on my college course, there was another girl, and we both worked together there. And the owner said, we'd love you two to run it together. So I was like 20, probably early 20s. I was running a 1 Michelin star restaurant with, you know, pretty good sized wine list. And Isaac had taught me all this stuff about European wines. And, you know, we used to do like go to London once a month, get the train to London, go to lunch somewhere. Like he got me into food so bad. I remember vividly, he was like, hey, do you want to go to the Fat Duck? And I was like, that sounds like a terrible name for a restaurant. Like, and I had no idea anything about it. Anyway, so there was the 2 of us. We took the train down to London. We got the train to Marlow, walked to the Fat Duck, and we just had this like mind-blowing lunch. I remember, I don't know why I remember this, but I had a rabbit and cauliflower risotto, and it was just like mind-blowing. I just remember like everything not being like a risotto, but it was just perfect. And we drank a bottle of Cristal from my birth year, and he was like, I want to drink this with you. And it was just spectacular. And so that's kind of started me thinking about international and kind of world cuisine, I guess, in a way. So then to jump back to Mawston, so then I did Mawston for another 2 years of running the wine list, writing the wine list, and running the venue. And it was just, it's so glorious there. I kind of miss how just English and Norfolk it is. But every time we go back home, we pop in for afternoon tea, that kind of thing. So,
looking back now with all of the knowledge that you've gained since, what was it like back then, the pressures of being so young and such an important venue?
I mean, I think at the time, because I was that young, I was learning stuff so quickly from Isaac and that kind of thing. I never really felt too much pressure because it all felt so natural, because the owners were super lovely, and they involved me with everything, from a young age. Just, they let me just write the wine list. They were like, oh, we like these things, but you go out whatever you want to do. And because the way the venue ran, it was just seamless every day. It was hard work because it was a hotel as well, so it was always open. But they had a full-time gardener that did the garden. They had like a part-time handyman that used to build everything. We built our own smokehouse, and just like, I don't know, I just found it I look back and go, I feel like I did a really great job, and it was such a good stepping stone for what I moved on to.
When did Australia land on your radar, and how did that come about?
Oh, it's such an odd little story. I have to try to be very clear here. I used to buy wine from this gentleman that had a wine company in Norwich. He lived in Australia about 10 years prior, and was working with Jonas Beeston, the wine legend from Sydney, Jonas Beeston. Anyway, I think he had to leave Australia because he had issues with a young lady or something like that. Anyway, I was talking to him one day, and he was like, oh, a friend of mine is opening a restaurant in Sydney. And I know that at this point I'd kind of done everything at Mawston as such. I was like, oh, yeah, okay. Anyways, I said, look, I'll have a chat. And that's when I had my first conversation with Vicky. And it was literally that. He was like, have a chat with her. I had a half an hour call, and she was like, if you want to come to Sydney, we'd love to have you, pretty much. And I don't know how the Sydney thing came up, but that was just like all the conversation of the initial little click, just to be like, this could be the next step. And then I think I probably mulled over it for about 2.5 minutes, being 21. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. So I booked my visa, I ordered my plane ticket, and then I told my parents in that order. Because, I feel like those regional countries in England, like, not a lot of people don't leave. You go back and people are doing the same thing, but they love living there. I was just like, I think I knew I had to get out. And it was really sad. Like, they didn't want me to go, but I was like, I need to do this. It might only be for 6 months, might be for a year. I don't know. I don't know who these people are I'm going to work for. Like, I think I just need to do this. And then so I worked at Mawston for 9 years, basically from the day I started until the day I finished. And then I had a couple of months off. And then I flew here in February of 2009 on Valentine's Day, I remember. So yeah, it was a bit of a whirlwind, and I don't really have much memory of thinking about moving to Sydney, just that I did.
Well, you joined the team that opened Sepia and spent a lot of time there. But what was it like when you landed in Sydney? What did you think of the culinary landscape?
I mean, the actual landing in Sydney was like, it was 7 o'clock. John picked me up. It was pissing down with rain. And he was there in arrivals with his newspaper, and he saw me and he dropped his newspaper and spilt his coffee. And I instantly just thought, what have I done? Like, this is just like, I knew nobody other than him. And at that point I was like, maybe I should just go back. Maybe this is not for me. Anyway, I did stay. And then I just somehow put myself in a position where I was with lots of people that knew everything about Sydney and its food, and it was so wonderful. I lived with John for the first 3 weeks, and got to meet Hugh and Huck, the wine writer, for quite a bit of those first 3 weeks, and he took me to like the first few restaurants, at that point I was still kind of like, what am I going to do here? Like, this is wild. So that was February, early February. And then the restaurant was delayed until April. So I didn't really have anything to do. So I moved myself into a hostel and spent most of my savings on telling my parents I was climbing the Harbour Bridge. Instead, I was just drinking cases of beer. I went to the Hunter Valley for a couple of weeks. I had a friend of a winemaker that I used to sell some wine in England, and I stayed with them for a couple of weeks and just like meandered and made some wine not made some wine, but like crushed the grapes, I guess. And then I moved back to Sydney in a share house, and we kickstarted Sepia like early April. But at that point, I hadn't really eaten anywhere. I didn't really know anyone. I didn't know anything. So to answer your question, I really didn't have any idea what was happening in Sydney at that point.
Sepia, when it first started, was very, very different to the incarnation that we saw a decade later. You were part of that whole journey of change that it went through. Tell us about the early years, what it was like finding your feet in Sydney and becoming part of this restaurant that gradually built and built.
Yeah, I mean, the origins are relatively fuzzy for me now, but I mean, I think the plan was just to open a really good, I mean, I use the word brasserie quite fluidly there, but a really good, solid city restaurant with great wine list. It looked beautiful. You felt elegant. You felt like you should dress up and have a good time. And then I think it was almost instantly, it just turned into something a little less more entree, main, dessert, and a little bit more, maybe we should stay in this room for longer when you're having dinner. And I think it was after, 2 years maybe, or 18 months that we moved to a more kind of tasting menu vibe. And that's when I think Martin and Vicky knew that they wanted to create the best restaurant in Australia or Sydney, and everyone was on board. And at that point I was Rodney's assistant as a sommelier. And so I had all these wines that I was able to work with that I'd never even heard of, When I was working at Mawson, you see like 3 Australian wines and you'd be like, God, they're the best. And you get here and then you'd be like, oh, okay, there's another 10,000 wines, And so that was pretty special, and then it just built and built and built. And, I was there for just shy on 10 years, and by the end of it, it was, this kind of like food theatre. You didn't come to Sepia for an hour and a half. If you did, you didn't know you were in the wrong place, essentially. And it was about theatre and food and wine and conversation and people having a really great time and feeling really special and celebrating, and it did all that stuff.
Martin Ben's food is extraordinary, but Sepia was not only known for that extraordinary culinary sort of exploration, but the way that the front of house team delivered on their promise. And tell us about what it was like in that front of house team and delivering such a warm sort of professional offering that you did.
Yeah, I think the key to that part is that it's really easy to be stuffy and to be a robot in that scenario, and that was drilled into me when I first got there. And then after 5 years, I became restaurant manager. So that was kind of my foray to build a really good culture within staff, which portrayed into the service. But, this was, trainings 2 times a week, constant refinement. I'm sure you're familiar with what happened. It was constant refinement. And if something didn't quite work one day, the next day we just change it and change it and change it and make it right. But we're also really fortunate to employ some really amazing, young, really special people that have now gone on to do really good things. And, but that was the key, there were no like like seasoned pros as such as you see around Sydney. They were all like young, really wanting to learn. Most of them were taking hospitality seriously like a career rather than just a job. And that was kind of, I think, the first movement that I kind of witnessed in my head and also in Sydney, that people were taking it really seriously, because it is the best job in the world.
Tell us about the front of house experience and how you deliver such a special experience. Your recall to tell a story of a wine has always been exceptional, and the intricacies of a dish. But when it comes to the service, what's important?
Important, I mean, there's like lots of points, but key points is the first interaction, the welcoming. That is, I mean, I've listened to a lot of your podcasts and a lot of people have said that, but it is so important to meet and greet someone with a smile, irrelevant of how you're feeling or how, or what's going on in the world, that they're there for a good time. And you have to give them that good time. And it's that just a hi, even if you can't get there, this is kind of very training Ben Brown talking here, but like, even if you can't get there, you tell all your staff that you have to say hello. It instantly puts people at ease. It instantly knows people are being looked after, even if they're not with someone. And then, hospitality is almost as simple as just keep making people happy and just having the best time. But, also at Sepia, we're all wearing suits and shirts and polished shoes, and the chair gets pulled out and the napkin always gets put back, and the cutlery comes. There's no cutlery in the table. It comes with every course, and that napkin on that plate is perfectly folded, and the glass is shining like no one's business, and the wine label is always facing the customer when you pour it. The water is never too low, like all those things. But you have to have the bodies to do that kind of thing as well, I guess, in a roundabout way. But you employ the right people and you build the right culture, and people love to do that stuff.
You spent a decade with Sepia, with Vicky Wild and Martin Ben and the incredible team there. What did you take from that experience?
I just grew up. I think it's almost as simple as that. I spent my entire 20s working in what eventually became, one of the best top 100 restaurants in the world. And all we strived to do was, in an arrogant way, was to be the best. We wanted to be the best restaurant, and everyone that came there have the best time and, be full as a restaurant and just serve people. And I look back and, I grew up as a person. I grew up as a manager. I built lots of skills in terms of people management, which have definitely helped me even post Sepia. And my wine knowledge, I spent 10 years working with a wine list that was, 5,000 wines long or however long, I can't really remember. But all a lot of practical stuff, but also, mental stuff in terms of that, like dealing with staff and people and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I look back and be, forever grateful for Martin and Vicky, and just how it's a restaurant that will go down in Sydney folklore forever, I think.
You then joined, one of the most influential groups of the sort of modern era with hospitality in Sydney, the Swillhouse Group with the Albertos. How different was that operation for you moving from the world of Sepia?
Yeah, it was the opposite, wasn't it, really? I mean, I'm pretty happy to never do my tie-up 5 days a week. And, wearing Vans to work was pretty cool for a while. But I think I did kind of struggle with the casualness to start with, if I'm completely honest, just because all I knew was 3-hat service. Not that you had to, not that 1-hat service is you have to do X, Y, Z to do that, and 3-hat is whatever. I was just programmed, I guess, in a roundabout way. If you do it for 10 years, that's all you kind of know. And it was finding that balance of professionalism and being friendly, because I think that's almost the scale, if you know what I mean. Where at the top end, it's pure professionalism, with an element of yourself. And then as you head down, you know, I've served you in both the restaurants. When you come to somewhere like Alberto's, I guess it's almost like you can be a bit more yourself without sounding kind of hard on yourself like that, where you can just talk almost as you are, a little less kind of professional, not less professional, but a little less like work, where this is a bit more fun, I guess, in a roundabout way. But it didn't take me overly long, but I definitely remember those first like few weeks of, I don't have to put my hand behind my back when I pour your water, or you know, those sort of things. But Alberto's was a different thing completely, because the boys set as a venue, had the restaurant set up, and then they basically wanted me to run it, you know, for them. And that was a dream. So not only did I have to think about this kind of service thing that was probably more often was actually just in my head, but I also had to open a brand new restaurant. And God, it was fun. Christ, it was so good.
The group has an incredible ability to create so much energy in the room and this incredible atmosphere, along with the great food, but it's really focused on good times. How do they capture that?
I mean, when I think about this sort of stuff, I think about like reading reviews online, which I don't really like doing that much, but when you get to a point in the venue, in the level of the venue, you kind of read them. And the common thing is that people say they have good food, good service, and good vibes, or something to do with things that are out of your realm in terms of cooking, food and drink. And I think what the boys do so amazingly well is they just build somewhere that you want to go again and again and again and again, you know, whether it's you walk into Alberto's and there's these big Italian posters on the wall, or it's a song that you've heard somewhere and your body just kind of moves, or your brain's thinking about other things, you know, or you go to Hubert and you know, sometimes it takes me 10 minutes to walk downstairs because I'm just like in awe of being there. Even for working for the company, the same thing, you know. You think it would get boring, but even if you do 50 management meetings there and then you go for dinner, you're still enamored by what happens. They just get it, I think, also. And that's, I think, like you said, Alberto's just had that. You know, you walked in there, it was really hard to not have a good time in there, I find.
You've been a massive part of the Sydney culinary landscape for over a decade now, but you've headed north with a new gig and you're out of Sydney. Tell us about that decision and what you're doing.
Yeah, well, what happened was, I mean, it actually happened on the first day of Alberto's, where we opened at 5:00 and my wife called me at 10 to 5 and she said, I'm pregnant. And I said, oh shit, that's great news. How do you feel? And it was all just like, that's something that I had wanted to have in my entire life, was a little family. And then so we had Lily, which was great. And then 2 years later, we had Monty, this other little chubby boy that we've got now. And at that point, it was, you know, working 5 nights a week till 1 a.m., not seeing the kids that much. It was that balance that I loved Alberto so much, but I still wanted to, you know, obviously be as much of a dad as I could. It just got to the point where we had to just kind of think about ourselves a little bit more. And, you know, I'd done almost 20 years of full on me being in hospitality, that kind of vibe. And so we kind of were thinking about what can we do? Where can we go? That's a little bit more. We both grew up regionally. My wife's from Adelaide, regional Adelaide. I'm obviously from Norfolk. So the kids grew up on farms and we really wanted to have that for our family. And then it essentially happened that the owner, Ben, who owns Isola, the venue here, came to Alberto a couple of times and we got chatting. a few times, and my in-laws live up in Foster, and a couple of times I called them and said, hey, can you do a delivery for them, whatnot. Out of the blue, he just texted me, said, hey, are you free for a chat? And I was like, sure. And he called me and said, hey, look, I've got this thing. I don't know if it's what you're feeling, but I've got this opportunity in Foster. And I mean, I'm not a universe guy, but this is like grandparents, like a really beautiful venue, and everything that we kind of wanted into one. It was really hard to leave Alberto's, and I'm still besties with them all. I love them to bits, but it was the thing that we had to do in our life now, and we just made the call, and we moved up here just before Christmas. So now we're living regional, 5 minutes from the beach, although I hate sand, so I'm teaching myself to hate sand less. And, you know, working in this glorious little spot that's the old boat shed on Wallace Lake. If you're a table of two, you sit on a bar that your feet are almost dipping into the water. And when it's a beautiful day, yesterday the dolphins were jumping in the lake. And, you know, the food is just the most delicious, like Mediterranean fare. It's a menu that you read and that you know what you're going to get. You know, I think 5 years ago, people would have said 4 hours from Sydney. No way, that's too far. But I think now people are just like, that's easy. And so we're seeing more and more, you know, people like me move into regional areas and regional dining getting better and better and better, and people caring. And that's kind of where we're at now.
We've had a lot of people on the show talk about the changes that have happened in their lives because of the last couple of years, but coupled with that move out of Sydney and into the place where you are, has it had an impact on you the last couple of years and this big change that you've had?
I mean, COVID for me personally has been quite good, dare I say, because in the first lockdown that we had in Sydney, when we had to shut everything down, myself and my wife, we literally swapped roles for 3 months. She went back to work early and I became a full-time dad for 3 months when Lily was, I think she was 5 months. So 5, 6, 7, 8 months, which was all like this time where they just start being little people. And, you know, I saw the first tooth and I got the first dad and all this stuff, you know, which as a dad, you never get really in the grand scheme of things. So I had this like incredible 3 months of, you know, cooking every day for them. You know, she was at this point where she's having little purees and I was cooking like a restaurant for a 5-month-old, you know, like I wanted to garnish her food and all this stuff, dumb things that I was doing, but it was just so beautiful. And then obviously we all crashed back to reality and went back to work. And then the second one, a very similar thing happened. I had Monty. So I managed to have, you know, 12, 16 weeks where I did the same thing. So I've been really lucky. And I've had the best time just looking with my kids. So, but, you know, that at the same time, the second lockdown was very, for us, was kind of sad because with our first child, everybody got to see her day 1 and day 2 and day 3 and day 4. He was born in lockdown, so no one saw him for 10 weeks. So it was just the flip thing. We were just like, we just didn't think about that, you know, where we loved having them at home, but that's all you knew. So it was tough for us. And I think that maybe halfway through that, we were like, okay, you know, if this is going to happen again, we want to be somewhere where we're close to grandparents, where the sun is shining, where the sky is blue, where, you know, when you open your front door, you don't see a street. You know, we've got a little park out the front of the house, you know, like all these things that just make you really value being a family, I guess.
The group is growing with another venue opening shortly. What are you looking forward to this year?
I'm actually, we're so excited. These guys that have got Isola are really they're locals, which is the first thing. Ben and Leah, they're both born in Foster. Ben was born here when they were still delivering babies here. They're not anymore. His grandfather was the bouncer at the RSL where we're opening the new venue. So, these guys are not out-of-towners that are just opening a venue. They get it. They get what people want here. And they just want to do it really well. So next week we're going to start building. So it's going to be a beautiful little tiny, 25-seat wine bar restaurant of night, and then during the day we'll just do the most delicious sandwiches and be a little bit more casual. But I guess I'm really looking for – it's tricky staffing-wise up here. I think one thing that is common through my whole career is that I've had a great mentor. Now I'm now moving into that role. So I'm looking at building culture and trying to, find as many locals here that can work with us, that we can teach and educate and learn. I think it's been a common conversation over the last 5 years that people are in hospitality for essentially the wrong reason, and that it's a lifelong career. There are so many facets within the hospitality that you can do, and that I really want to be that person that's pushing, education and learning and training in a regional area, whether that be through wine, which there's not a great deal of kind of larger lists and that kind of thing here, but also to, as we were saying before, just making people really happy. People, if you come here, it's hard to not be happy, and we want to just build environments where people come and just have the best time.
Well, Ben, you're one of the very best front of house professionals that I've encountered. So it's an honour to have you on Deep in the Weeds today, and so glad to hear what the future lies for you. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, man. Stay safe.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.